Welcome, welcome, welcome to another opportunity to learn and grow. And the beautiful thing about learning is that nobody can take it away from you. This is class time. You can choose to follow in real time on Television Jamaica's YouTube channel or onespotmedia.com, Music99 or gojamaica.com. And remember, you can use the various social media platforms for questions or comments. Our subjects for today include CSEC Geography, Cape Economics. But first up, we have Information Technology with I, Leo Lewis. Today we'll be looking at computer hardware, specifically storage media and devices. Make way forward. All right, so we're talking about storage media. It's one of possibly the most overlooked topics, I believe, in the syllabus, but it's pretty integral. And there are two specific areas inside of the syllabus we'd like to pay attention to. Specifically, the section that says we need to explain what these devices are, explain how to use them. Now, fact is, there are two types of storage, kinda. The idea behind them is that there's one set that stores information temporarily, and that means as long as there is power on the device, then of course the memory will always store information. The other is permanent, meaning that regardless of whether or not there's power, there will always be information stored on that piece of device or that media. And so we try to classify storage into these basic categories. When we talk about temporary, however, we don't really use the word storage. We use the word memory. And when we talk about memory, the first thing that always jumps to mind for most students is RAM, random access memory. And random access memory stores information just slightly or keeps it so that your CPU can grab it pretty quickly as opposed to going straight to your hard disk. Now it's called random because the fact of the matter is you can go to any position in the memory based on how your operating system has managed the memory itself. So we have random access memory, we have registers, and these are what we call the CPU workhorses. Why they are CPU workhorses essentially is because they are found directly on the CPU. So even though you might buy a chip or you might see your computer come with a CPU and you think that that's just the processor, actually there are other things inside your CPU, the register including. And then we have cache, and if you were here last week, we looked at 3 levels of cache. So we're going to look at it a little bit closer today. And then we have RAM. Now, there's a question mark beside RAM, and we'll discuss why we have a question mark beside RAM. Because remember, when we talk about memory, it's supposed to be temporary. And that's what we, of course, have designed it for. So, RAM. Very early forms of RAM came in the form of capacitors. And these capacitors, and those of you who do physics and are at fifth form might be thinking, okay, capacitors, I do know about capacitors, they store charge. Exactly. And that is what this type of RAM used to do. And we call it static RAM because as long as you stored something there, it just stayed there. But then the developments changed and we started to use something called dynamic RAM, which of course is about circuitry now. And this dynamic RAM has to be refreshed on a regular basis by your computer or by the power that's coming into your computer. Now, for those of you who are doing Cape ComSci, if you're watching at the Unit 1, I think it is, you have to learn about flip-flops. And these flip-flops are the memory agents. These are the smaller devices that store a bit. All right? And then we have SDRAM. And the S stands for synchronous, meaning that this RAM chip is now refreshed based on the clock that is inside the CPU. So there's a time on the refreshing. There's a time on how the computer makes sure that the information is there repeatedly. So it's not about just keeping one static charge and holding it. It's about refreshing the information. Because the truth of the matter is your computer goes at a very fast pace and is always switching information in and out of memory locations. And so we really need to keep that refreshing going on. And then even last week we looked at DDR, which is double data rate. And we said that there are about 4 or 5 levels depending on what machine you're working with. And this DDR is about double data rate, increasing the rate at which information is written to RAM or taken from RAM. And of course, we go on to RAM. And one of the reasons why there was a question mark beside RAM is because RAM isn't really temporary, but we tend to include it in memory. And we think about it that way because it's very primary. In other words, it has to exist in your machine for your machine to work. Why? Well, it stores the startup instructions for your computer. So let's say you turn your computer on, you know, the power comes up, you hear some noise going on. Your RAM stores some subroutines that might tell the computer, okay, check see if memory is there, check see if a hard drive is there, check to see if a mouse is connected, things like that. And what is happening here is that your subroutines inside of RAM are running to ensure that your computer has a sense of health, or, well, as we would say, checking itself to make sure that the computer works. All right? So these are actually chips on your motherboard, and you can locate them. They tend to look something like what we have on the screen here. There are some technicians who can remove them depending on whether or not, you know, they are resident on the board, or they are resident on the board. But the technicians tend to be able to remove them by taking off the solder wires or the solder that's on the underside of the motherboard. But this kind of RAM, or definitely RAM in general, you don't want to move. You don't want to remove it. You don't want to have anything to do with it specifically if you are just a normal user. You need to leave it alone, let it do what it's there for. So what are the types? Well, we tend to look at 4 different types, or thereabout. RAM, which is just read-only memory, which basically your manufacturer places it on the board, and that's it for the RAM. And again, if you corrupt the RAM or something goes wrong, might as well you buy another computer. They're that expensive. And then you have the programmable type, which basically, when they're created, then something or someone can program the RAM to do what you want it to do, but that's only once. So that's programmable. Then we have erasable, which of course allows for UV light to just erase what's on the RAM chip. And then we have electrically erasable, programmable read-only memory. So these are the 4 types we pay attention to. And then we are going to look at the evolution of double EEPROM, which actually is flash memory, which most of us should already know about when it comes to talking about your phones. So cache is the other one that we need to look at. And you can associate this with possibly using your internet, having files stored just in case, or the most frequently used files, which simply means that you might be browsing, you might be using a particular program a lot of times, you might be using some data a lot of times. What cache does is just store this information for you and stores the information so that the CPU can go directly to cache when it needs this information. It tends to be pretty small, 64 kilobytes, the maximum, which is not bad. It's pretty good, depending on the machine that you're working with, of course. And then we have 3 levels. Level 1, Level 2, and Level 3, which we looked at in some detail last week when we looked at specifications. And your Level 1 tends to always be on your processor. So again, your processor doesn't only contain control units and ALU. There are other things inside your processor, and cache is one of them. And then you have Level 2 and Level 3. Level 3 is always outside your processor. And what happens with your data is that when Level 3 gets the information, then there might be other data that is frequently used, even more than what is in Level 3. And then there might be other things that are used more frequently than Level 2. And so that kind of a succession happens with your cache. And each one tends to be smaller than the other. So Level 3 might be large, or will be larger than your Level 2. Your Level 2 will be larger in capacity than your Level 1. And the levels tend to, of course, well, if you look at the levels inside of your computer, it tends to dictate the type of computer you're working with. If you're working with a computer that, as we looked at last week, is about you being a gamer, or possibly you're an engineer, or possibly your design you design movies, or you work on movies, you're an editor, something of that sort where you have a lot of information need to work with, you'll find that your computers tend to have up to level 3. And then we have our registers. Now, it's kind of technical to think about registers, but what you really need to pay attention to is to the fact that they are pretty small and they might store just one little piece of data. But there are several registers inside your CPU. And these registers will basically store some very small or some very minute details or some very, very small things about an instruction. So here we are seeing that we have, well, there are 3 of them mentioned by name, and then there are some other general purpose ones. But we have one specific one here called a program counter. And that program counter keeps a tab on what particular section of your program you're at, or a particular line of your program. And then the instruction register stores the actual instruction. And then we have these general purpose registers, which basically might store an integer or store configurations for a word, or store configurations for a letter, or things like that. To give you a better understanding, let's assume that we're working with a Pascal program. And in this Pascal program, we have a equal 2 plus 3. Well, inside of that Pascal program, after we compile it, the compiler will add some information to it. And that addition is basically assembly or other subroutines that is needed to run the program. When that happens, you might have a situation where the number 2 is moved to a register. Then the number 3 is moved to another register. And then an addition takes place between both registers, wherein the total is placed in the first register. So what will happen with your register? Your program counter might keep track of the lines. So for each instruction, your program counter is saying, okay, all right, we're at this line, this is what is being worked on. As soon as another instruction is ready and your CPU or your control unit has fetched it, moves on to this particular register, this particular line. And then, of course, these EAXs that we're seeing and EBX are actually specific registers with a specific name. And those will store the actual information. Just as we're seeing here, we're seeing 2 is being moved to another register and 3 is being moved to another register. So what's happening there? Inside of your CPU, these values are being switched in and switched out as a program is executed. And don't think of a program just like Pascal. It can be software. You might be running Internet Explorer. You might be running Calc or the calculator. You might be running Excel. All of these different software are running programs in the background. You might, if you look at your task manager, you will see processes running on your computer. And each of these processes gets space in RAM and, of course, gets CPU time. And yes, everything relating to those instructions are stored inside registers at some point in time. And then we have what are called secondary storage devices and media. Now, these store information permanently. And again, remember, we said that permanently means as long as it is stored there, whether power is on or not, it is still stored on the media or on the device. Now, there are sometimes we use the word device and media interchangeably because of how the contraption works. Here's the thing. Most of the times when we talk about media, we are talking about the particular thing that the data is stored on. So if it's a DVD, that's the media. If it's an actual platter or disk, that's media. The drive itself is the housing or the mechanism into which you place the DVD or the disk itself for the reading and writing to take place. So there is a slight distinction, or, well, that's not slight, it's a big distinction, but try not to use them interchangeably. All right? But let's take a moment just to look at the smaller units of storage just before we go into these devices. We should already know what a bit is. And the word bit is short for binary digit. All right, that's where it comes from. And That binary digit is either a 0 or 1, and we understand it as a 0 or 1. The fact is, your computer doesn't even know what a 0 or 1 is. What it knows is electricity. And so your computer functions in a way that it sends pulses or weak pulses to your different devices in a series of configurations, thus representing bits inside your machine. So if you press a key on your keyboard, a switch is inside your keyboard that fires a signal, and that signal goes to what is called, well, it should be an encoder. And that encoder takes the information and says, okay, this is it? Okay. Since as this is what he pressed, let's send this kind of a signal to your CPU saying that this is what has been pressed. All right? So that's where your zeros and one comes from. Then we have your byte. And your byte is actually eight digits, all right? 0, 1, 0, 1, any number of configurations. Now, for those of you who are interested, you can check out your ASCII codes. And these ASCII codes are basically codes that tell you what the encoding for each letter, each special character is on your computer. All right? Of course, there are also zeros and ones. And then there is a smaller measurement, very old measurement, we call it a nibble, where you use just four bits out of the entire byte. You might have heard of the term hexadecimal, and hexadecimals basically use 4 digits or 4 binary digits to code numbers. You'll also hear the term hexadecimal when you're working with internet, when you're trying to change colors, possibly in the background of your web page. So you'll find those things around, and it normally is stored using 4 binary digits. Now, you should now be acquainted with these bigger figures. Kilobytes, 2 to the 10 bytes, which is actually 1024 or 1024. Normally, you'll use approximations at school, but I don't expect you to do that, and I'll show you why a little bit later. So your kilobytes, 2 to the 10, your megabytes, 2 to the 20, gigabytes, 2 to the 30, terabytes, 2 to the 40, and of course, I could possibly say the values, but there are measurements beyond terabytes, 2 to the 50. I'm going to try to call some of these. So kilobytes is 1024, megabytes, 1,048,576 bytes. Now, and you might be seeing why I'm saying don't use approximations, because you'll be leaving off all this large amount of storage space when you think about it, especially if you're going to do calculations. Gigabytes, 1,073,741,824 bytes. So if you use an approximation, again, you're leaving off 73 million bytes, which you don't want to. Then we have terabytes, which is, I think it's 1,099,511,627,776 bytes. That right? Yeah, that sound kind of right. Anyway, it's time for a scheduled break. Stretch your legs, get some water, but come right back because you have a lot more to cover. Don't go too far.
Hi there, I'm Simon Preston from TVJ. Thank you very much for watching our YouTube channel. To see our latest videos and also to see live events, click here. To see our full videos on onespotmedia.com, click here. Thank you very much for watching.
Welcome back. If you're just joining us, we've been discussing device specifications. Let's continue. So we were looking at the storage capacities, or basically measurements for storage, and we left off at terabytes, which we said was 1,099,511,627,776 bytes. And the measurement thereafter is petabytes, and of course, it goes beyond petabytes. And I might try to pronounce this. 1,225,829,906,842,624 bytes. Again, as you can see, if we use approximations, we are leaving off quite a substantial amount of storage area. And again, if you're working with calculations, you want to keep those approximations out of your calculations. And that's why I adjure you, I ask you, use the surds or the indices, 2 to the 10, 2 to the 20, etc. Because what will happen, let's say for instance, we have, a couple megabytes or just 1 megabyte. All right, it looks like that. But when we do the approximations, we have 48,576 bytes that we are disregarding. All right, and that could be quite a bit of pictures, or even close to a small video. All right, so where do we store all this information? Well, there are two places your syllabus points out, and the second one is pretty new, I should say, but of course we've been using it for quite some time. The first one, however, is your local storage, and that means the actual device has a storage mechanism on it. Your phones, your hard disks in your laptops or in your computers, these are local storage areas. Why? Because they are present with you on the device, or they're on the device. All right, and you tend to get access to these directly or indirectly. Directly by using some file manager. In the case of Windows, you might be using Windows Explorer, not Internet Explorer. Now, two different pieces of software. And on Mac, you might be using Finder. On your phone, you might just see a little folder on your phone screen that represents the file manager, and those are the tools that you use to go to these different places on your local device or your local storage. And then we have cloud. Now, your cloud storage, we call it cloud simply because it's stored somewhere else. But the fact of the matter is, wherever it is stored on the internet, it's always on some machine or on some computer somewhere. So it's local there, but you just don't have that device with you currently. And so wherever you have that information on the web, it's stored on somebody else's server. And you'll access these just like how you might log in to Google or log into your email address or something like that. So you're given what is called an application programming interface, or just somewhere where you can type in your email address as username or some username and a password. And when you go into that particular setting or that particular piece of software on their server, you are able now to access your files, your folders. You can create files and folders on the server. All right. So these are basically what your syllabus speaks about. And of course, there are differences between them, and they are wide and varied. But let's see if we can run through them as quickly as possible. The capacities for both tend to vary. And again, capacities boil down to money. If you are searching, well, if you search Amazon or any one of those, you'll find that there are different storage devices or storage media, in the case of local storage. And you might be paying like $100 or more depending on brand or depending on the capacity. And yes, it does cost a pretty bit when you go when you want a lot to store. All right. However, on your cloud, it depends as well. Google, for example, and there's another one that we'll look at, you'll basically have to pay for the storage, but you are given some amount of storage free. It was just, I think it was last week, there was somebody asking me, you know, I need to back up my files and I need to do them online. I'm saying, well, yeah, you can do them online, and if you can pay for it, that's great. And they're saying, no, I don't want to pay for it. And I'm like, okay, all right, fine. If you don't want to pay for it, create 20 Google accounts. I'm not saying that you should try that, but if you create 20 Google accounts, you get 15 gigs, that's about 300 gigs of storage. So if you want to do something like that, that's up to you. Don't try it and don't tell anybody that I told you to do it anyway. All right? So you can pay for this storage as is necessary. And then accessibility, as long as you have power on the particular machine or particular local machine, you can always get your information. But for your cloud, you need power as well as internet access. So there is where an additional cost may come into it. All right? The fact that you need to pay for internet access. And then security issues. The cloud-based storage, some of them tend to guarantee some kind of security. Or again, it depends on how you're paying for it. And you have to shop around because there are so many. For example, with Google, as I said before, you get 15 gigabytes free. But if you want to pay for it, there are about 4 different packages, or there might be more, where you pay like 2 cents per gigabyte. I'm not going to do any calculations where this one is concerned though. But you pay 2 cents per gigabyte per month for that Google storage. And there is another one I found, Treasure, which gives you 10 gigabytes. And then you have a payment of about $99 or $9.99 or $24 per month for this kind of paid storage. Now again, when you pay for the storage, they tend to guarantee security. And these organizations tend to do a lot of maintenance on their machines. They tend to always be looking for good technology that can work for them. They're always also backing up their own or backing up your files. So you can pay for these things as well, for cloud storage, of course. And it's a good way to start thinking about storage generally. Why? Because sometimes your devices may go down, and it's important that you have some backup somewhere. I remember it was like about 10 years ago, I had a hard drive full of work, drawings, computer programs, all manner of things. And I had to continually just back up the things that I thought were important because I knew that someday the drive might die. But we can discuss that. So now we're talking about drives, all right? And the common one is your hard disk drive. And we're going to run to a video just to show you what the hard disk drive looks like in motion. But here's what. We're looking at what we call a lot of moving parts. Your disk drive spinning, that's one movement. The read-write head on the device moves. And that moves because of what is called an armature or an arm that moves the head along the disk. Now you might be saying, what on earth, why does that look like that? Well, you might not be seeing this spinning right now because it's spinning at about 7,200 revolutions per minute. Now that is pretty fast. And that kind of tells you why when you are using your computer, it is moving that quickly when you're retrieving files. If your computer isn't retrieving files quickly, then there are other things that you can do. You can do what is called a disk defragmentation. You can try to organize your files so that your disk will keep the same file in the same sectors or close sectors. All right? And that will help you to retrieve the information much quickly. And as you can see from the video, this person is basically moving the read-write head. Now, if you can do that, you're not supposed to be touching anything in your drive like that. But it does show you that it can move. One of the problems, or very early problems with disks, was that the film of air between the disk and the read-write head was so small. And anytime that read-write head touches your disk while it's spinning at 7,200 revs per minute, it basically scratches the surface of your disk. And that is what we call a head crash. All right? So we have your hard disk. And basically, it's a magnetic medium. So your read-write head acts as a magnet and magnetizes the material or magnetizes the disk in a certain kind of a way that allows for the storage of of bytes or bits. And we talk about IBM, I should say, was talking about a proposed increase in density, which means that it makes everything store a little bit closer and compact on your hard disk, and thus increases storage capacity. The access time for your hard disk tend to range from about 5 to 8 milliseconds, and that access time is measured by the time it takes for you to move your arm or move the arm of the read-write head. And of course, because they have moving parts, they may fail. Well, thank God though, for the past couple of years, IBM has only reported 2 to 9% failure per year, which is pretty good considering the fact that there are so many hard drives all over the world. But this failure rate is something for you to keep in mind, because it helps you now to think, okay, what if the disk fails? What am I going to now do? The idea, look to the cloud or look for some other storage media, which could mean that you go for something external and you just store needed things on an external drive. Another look at it, if we break down your hard disk, we see where your hard disk has what we call sectors, tracks, and cylinders. And these basic sections of your hard disk are used just to help the computer understand locations on your hard disk. So let's say, for instance, you want to retrieve something from your hard disk. Your OS will tell you, okay, go to this particular cylinder, this particular platter, or this particular disk, and this particular sector. And your operating system and your CPU have to be negotiating all of that going forward in order to retrieve things for you. I spoke about defragmentation earlier. One of the things that tends to happen with your disk is that while it is spinning, your computer is storing fragments of your file all over your disk. So it's not storing everything in one track. It's fragmented all over. And so it might store some information in one sector, move to another place and store it in another sector. And so your computer has to keep track of where all these fragments are. And that's why I would say you need to defrag your computer. All right? So we said earlier that the disk is spinning at about 7,200 revs per minute. And that is quite important given the fact that you have to pay attention to how much information needs retrieving and how fast you need the retrieval. So as your disk rotates, the amount of times that one particular point on your disk goes under the head is about 7,200 times in 1 minute. So can you imagine that being accessed 7,200 times? That's pretty fast. All right? And there are some devices, of course, or the majority of them that have multiple disks, or we call them multiple platters, have read-write heads for each platter. All right? So for each disk, there's a read-write head. And in many cases, there are 2 read-write heads, one for the top of the disk, one for the underside of the disk. And so that is where we talk about double density or even double-sided. So your read-write head is able now to take information not only from the top but from the bottom as well. And then we have another look at it from the breakdown as it relates to sectors and track sector. Now each sector in your device or on your disk stores about 512 bytes, right? Each one. And that is why we talk about fragmentation. If you're storing a file that's about 100 kilobytes, we have to break it down, or your computer has to break it down into 512 bytes to put it in different sectors on your hard disk. And so each block of space, each sector, stores about 512 bytes, all right? So keep that in mind as well. And again, your read-write head has to move along your disk, track by track, in order to read from these different sectors. Then we have what are called SSD drives, which in my mind are possibly some of the better drives. For the same reason, in that because they have no moving parts, then they have a longer longevity or a longer life. So they are basically what makes up what we know as flash memory. And you can think about it as just a number of clusters of storage storage devices are semiconductors. Those of you who might do chemistry or physics might know what a semiconductor is. And normally semiconductors are created, well, all right, let me just go in there for the sake of going into it. Semiconductors are created with silicon, basically. And you should have heard the term Silicon Valley. Why? Because in that valley, there is quite a bit of silicon. And what silicon is, it's a particular element that is found naturally in sand, etc. And it can store charge as well as take away charge from it. So it can stay in different states and be stable. And so that is what you can remember about it, all right? Now your SSDs are pretty portable, they're pretty small, and the reason why they're small, of course, because there are no spinning disk and arms in them, but just pure electronics, all right? And so you can carry them around with you, but be careful with that. As you carry them around, you want to ensure that whatever you're carrying around, you don't bring a lot of static charge to it, or you don't expose it to electricity unnecessarily. All right, so make note of that. And then we have access times, which are about 1 millisecond. So you can see immediately there's about a 7 millisecond difference, but that's a big difference given the fact that this is just 1 millisecond, because all you have to do when you plug it in, basically the information that you want to store or you want to retrieve just takes 1 second to find where it is and get it back, as opposed to the access arm or the arm of your hard disk moving in and out. All right? So flash memory, the same thing we're talking about when we're talking about SSDs, but the technology behind it comes from EEPROM, and that's what we were talking about earlier. EEPROM has evolved, or the evolution of it brought about flash memory. And so with EEPROM, even though you are changing small amounts, and that's the difference with EEPROM and flash, you can change small amounts on EEPROM, but with your flash memory, you can change quite considerable amount of data. And so that was used now for phones. And of course, it is resident on the board. So we have more erasable data, and the technology behind flash drives and memory cards. All right. So you might, maybe one of the days you try to experiment and you opened your flash drive and you might have seen a little chip in your flash drive. All right. That is flash memory. And of course, some of you might, when you pull it, you know that it still works. So that's some experiment for you to try. And then you have memory cards, which need different memory card readers, but it's the same kind of technology, basically. And then we have our optical discs. These are getting more or less obsolete. Well, unless you have like Blu-ray for your movies, etc. But your optical drives employ the use of light and lasers for the sole purpose of reading and writing. And it depends on the type of device you have, or burner that you might have. You'll be able to write information to the device. All right? So what are they? Well, we know CDs and DVDs, and I tend to group them simply because, of their usage, most often not. We have CD-ROMs, CD minus Rs, CD plus Rs, and CD rewritable. And each of them having their own use, and we'll just explore them shortly. Minus R, in terms of CD minus R, means that when you add information to this particular CD or DVD, you won't be able to add any more information on it. So even if the information has not filled the media to capacity, you won't be able to add anything. And you might be burning things, and you'll see where your burner or your software tells you that, should you close the media, right? CDRs tend to be like that. As soon as you've burned something, that's it. Your plus Rs means that you can add data onto whatever you've added until you've reached capacity. And simply your rewritable means that you can erase whatever is on it and, of course, put something else on your media. However, each of these, or even this rewritable, has a certain lifespan. So you might be able to write or rewrite, possibly 20 times or thereabout. But after that, basically, it's done for. And then we have our Blu-ray discs, which have become commonplace for movies since of late. And we have 3 different types, according to verbatim. Recordable, which is just like the R from your CDs or your DVDs. and then recordable dual layer. So we'll look at that a little bit more. And then rewritable RE for your Blu-rays. Same kind of mechanism as your rewritable for CDs and DVDs. So let's look at the mechanism just a bit, or what's inside the disc. Your disc contains certain layers of material. Some of them are reflective, or most of them are reflective. Now, as you can, or as you might can see, that there's 1.2 millimeters. Your disc is pretty small. So for someone, or for even a device, to have different layers, the technology is pretty remarkable. And so we're looking at it that if you have a dual layer, there's a silver layer of aluminum. In a dual layer, you might have several of these layers upon which information is burnt or stored. And in your DVDs and your CDs and your Blu-rays, there are basically what we call pits and lands. So these pits and lands reflect light in different manner. And here's what happens. As your light moves across the surface of your disc, what is happening is that if there's a change in the reflection, that stipulates that, okay, that is where we record a 1. If there isn't a change over time, then it's pure 0. But as long as there's a change, then it's a 1. So if we're going across the disc and meet upon a pit, that edge that between the pit and the land is referred to as a 1. All right? So we have several layers of coating always, and then of course the measurement of the beam is what determines the change. All right. All right. So let's look at them with a little bit more. What can I say? A closer, a bigger microscope. Your CDs, DVDs, and Blu-ray discs tend to be different in terms of the size of pits and lands, the size or the distance between the track itself, and of course how clustered each pit and land is basically to each other. So the measurements tend to be smaller as you progress. So with your CDs, you have a certain measurement for your pit or your land. All right. So your laser burns on these devices in that manner. But then for your DVDs, these pits and lands get remarkably smaller than your CD. And if you have a dual layer DVD, what that means is that those very same measurements for your pits and lands are reflected on both layers, or the different layers that exist there. And then Blu-ray, of course, it was given its name because the laser was blue, but it's a very high intense laser which ensures, and very precise, that ensures that your laser burns the aluminum film or whatever it's being stored on, and very minuscule, all right? Very small, very tight, very compact. And that, of course, accounts for the different sizes. For your CD, you go up to about 700 megs. Your DVD, depending on the layer, the regular ones are, well, it depends on the layer. Sometimes you have dual layers, etc. You will have about 4.7 to about 8.5 gigabytes of storage. And your HD DVD 15, and then your Blu-ray is like the monster of them all, up to 128 gigabytes. All right. So can you imagine? Some computers didn't even have that much storage at one point. But all this storage now allows them to, of course, use it for different types of things. So let me quickly show you an application where that is concerned. If we have a movie of about 2 hours long, and you know, well, feature movies are about 2 hours long. For those of you who watch, what was it? Avengers Endgame is about 3 hours. So what we do now is to identify how many seconds are in that movie, which is about 7,200. And then each second has a number of frames. Most often are 24 frames, which is like 24 pictures. There are other movies that are shot at like 60 frames per second, but you know, that's a whole heap. And then that will tell us how many frames are in the entire movie. When you find out those frames, if it's a picture, the picture might be about 0.5 megabytes. And when we are finished with that, you can see where our movie might be about 84 gigs in size. But again, we need to make sure that we change other things so that we can compress it and that it can store on the DVDs or on the Blu-ray. That's it for today. I'm sorry I have to leave, but stay tuned. CSEC Geography is after the break.
Hi there, I'm Simon Preston from TVJ. Thank you very much for watching our YouTube channel. To see our latest videos and also to see live events, click here. To see our full videos on onespotmedia.com, click here. Thank you very much for watching.
We will be showing a
It's here. Interactive classes for all ages on the School Time channel on onespotmedia.com. With a combination of live Zoom classes and recorded class time, Schools Not Out lessons, and numerous educational content, we've created a comprehensive 24-hour channel dedicated exclusively to educating our nation's youth. Early childhood through to primary, secondary and tertiary, it's one stop on one spot for education 24 hours. Brought to you by the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information in association with Television Jamaica Limited.
Hi there, I'm Simon Preston.
Welcome back to class time. We now move to CSEC Geography. I am Clarine McFarlane, and today's lesson will focus on agriculture. Let's get into it. Today we'll be discussing agriculture as a primary economic activity. Now our objectives for today would include defining the concept agriculture, explaining the factors that are influencing the development of agriculture in the Caribbean region, identifying areas in the Caribbean where commercial and subsistence farming is important, and we will also compare the characteristics of large-scale farming and small-scale farming in Jamaica. So we will start by looking at agriculture, what it is. Oftentimes, the term agriculture is interchangeably used with farming. More or less, they are the same in this context. By definition, the cultivation of crops and the rearing of animals define the term. The term can also be defined as the cultivation of crops and rearing of animals for human consumption or for use as raw materials in industries or factories, as you may be familiar with the term. There are different types of agriculture, to include arable farming, which speaks to the cultivation of crops only. There is pastoral farming, which looks at the rearing of animals. We also have subsistence farming or peasant farming, which is practiced by farmer, and he engages his family into the whole regime. So the rearing of animals and growing of crops to feed the farmer and his family in a local community is referred to as subsistence farming. We also have commercial farming, which involves the growing and raising of livestock as a business or for export, for sale. Now, this business of agriculture is really looked at, or it is measured using different dimensions. Some of these would include, and they are also used as characteristics to distinguish between peasant farming or subsistence farming and commercial farming, are the location, the farm size, the labor that is involved for production of crops and the rearing of animals, the tools and equipment that are used on the farm for production, the technology that is used, as well as the market or the purpose for engagement. Agriculture is indeed important for many reasons, and some of these reasons would include the need for employment. We spoke about subsistence farming, and the farmer is engaged in farming activities, engaging his family. So more or less, some of those family members may not need to look for a job because they have it right there for them. There are different jobs that are afforded to them as well in the scheme of farming, not just to go out and put on water boots, but also technical jobs are involved. Agricultural products are a means for export on the local market, and as such, the locally produced food, they reduce the need for import. So we don't need to go out on the international market to gather food. So we have what is needed right where we are, so it is much more cheaper for us as a nation. It says foreign exchange in the sense that we are spending less. It is a part of our heritage. As far back as history would tell us, our first ancestors who settled on the land, they engaged in farming of some sort. Some of us are from family backgrounds where farming is still the primary economic activity that will send us to school, to put food on our plate, to get us clothes that we need, and all the little fancy things. Local production also improves food security, which means that farming will supply all that is necessary for the growing demand of the immediate population. And as such, it is also used as resources or raw materials for industries to process and to make other things. We can think of the True Juice factory that rely on farming activities to get oranges and other fruits to make the juices that we consume. We can think of Grace Kennedy, who will process different farming produce in order to make food or tin food, which they will process in a different economic activity which was previously discussed. Agriculture also provides or contributes to export earnings by means of the gross development product, the money that we earn based on what is produced locally, as well as generating income for local families, especially those in rural areas, which I touched on a bit just now. We look at why agriculture is important. Let us look at some of the statistics. And these statistics are local. They are specific to Jamaica. So in Jamaica, we have about 202,000 and more hectares that are active farmlands. That was in 2007. When we look at the absolute change between 1996 and 2007, we're looking at a decline. In terms of the types of farming activities, the cultivation of crops, what do we say that was again? Arable farming, good job. What that does, or because there are different activities that are now involved where money is produced, people are engaged in those activities as well. So the need for farming is not seen as a first love or an economic activity that others would want to engage in to begin with. And we have the breakdown in terms of the different activities, such as inactive farmland, woodlands and other farming engagements, lands that are identified as farmlands but are not reportedly being used. Even there's a decline based on recent developments. The employment statistics as it relates to Jamaica and farming, we can see obviously a decline from 2007 to now 2020. So we have just a little over 15.5% persons who are actively engaged in farming activities. There was a bit of change between 2011 and 2015, so we see a little decline from 2011. Then it picked up a little bit between 2012, 2013 into 2014, but then the decline started up to 2020. We look at the sectoral GDP, the contribution that there are comparatively with other economic sectors such as mining and quarrying, electricity and water, hotels and restaurants. Where can we find agriculture? Agriculture is probably the fourth in terms of contributing the least to the GDP of Jamaica. Some of the jobs or non-traditional jobs that are involved in farming activity would include biochemistry. Let me find some other ones that we may not hear of every day. We think of greenhouse managers, aquarists, agricultural specialists, greenhouse farmers, and that is away from the typical farming activity, going out to plow the land, the weed, the grass, and stuff like that. These are new jobs that are emerging. And with the emergence of technology, we also find that new jobs are being named, linked to agriculture. We even have agriculture research taking place. Despite the changes in numbers and the contribution of agricultural land activities in the Caribbean region, its contribution to the economics of the Caribbean, we find that it is still important. It is a source and a reliable source of food. It is also a reliable source of family income, whether we like it or not, whether or not we want to engage in it, and it is also seen as a viable means for foreign exchange. Once we have commercial farming in effect, some amount of foreign exchange is generated. Now, looking at the agricultural land use map of the Caribbean, we'll see that there are proportional circles. What these circles represent is the size of the farmlands on each Caribbean country, with Cuba being the largest. And I want you to follow me as we investigate this map. So notice the pie chart, as I mentioned, was drawn in proportion to the size of the country. And at the same time, Cuba has the largest, which means that they have a high dependency on agricultural activity. With that being said, employment linked to agriculture is really high. So much of the persons who are employed to the agricultural sector. Cuba, Dominican Republic, and Haiti follows thereafter. 90% of their farmlands, together Cuba, Haiti, Dominican Republic, they account for 90% of the farmlands in the Caribbean region. Let us now look at Jamaica. Only 44% of the agricultural farmlands in the Caribbean region is accounted for by Jamaica and Barbados together. And with the improvement of technology, the increase in demand for buildings, you find that there is consistent decline where that is concerned. There are different factors that are influencing the development and lack thereof of agriculture in the Caribbean region, and these may be classified under three headings. We have the physical factors, the economic factors, and we also have human factors. The physical factors would include climate, relief, and soil. We'll look at all these in a little while. The economic factors would include the market and the capital. I know these are some familiar terms to you. The human factors would include land tenure and size of the farmlands, traditional practices that are involved in the production, the role of the government, inheritance practices, as well as labor. We'll start by looking at the physical factors which are influencing the development of agriculture. We'll start by looking at climate. When we talk about climate, we're mainly looking at two things: the temperature and the amount of rainfall that agricultural lands are afforded. Plants and animals alike, they need different amounts of water in order to survive. And like ourselves, plants need the water. It is necessary for them. Without any water, then we have no form of production. We're not even thinking about the low yields that we will get. Where there is not enough rainfall, irrigation systems are applied. Irrigation systems are artificial means of bringing water to your farm. So we can bring irrigation systems in the form of tubes. We see sometimes farmers with a knapsack-looking container on their backs, and they have a spray can on it that they can disperse the water to their plants. We also speak of tubes, spray pan, and we also have the aerial systems that runs in pipe above the different plots. The seeds germinate at a particular temperature, and this is dependent on the type of crop that is being planted. Some are also located in areas that they will have the suitable temperature necessary for them to grow. Farming activities, as was mentioned, are mainly dependent on the diurnal rainfall rate, meaning the difference between the highest and the lowest temperature that is recorded in a particular day, or the annual average temperature and rainfall that is recorded over a year. There are other climatic factors that may affect how farming develops in different areas. These are sheltered slope, which will protect the plants from terrible winds or high winds, as well as direct sunlight. Now, on sheltered slope, some plants will grow best as against those that will need the direct sunlight and are not affected much by the wind strength of the slope. Soil is another factor. Where agriculture is concerned, the soil must be properly aerated. It must be fertile, having the right amount of nutrients, and so the mineral content and texture are also important. Absent these qualities, the soil is said to be infertile, and as such, the yields will be very poor and your crop will be very little. If the soil lacks the necessary nutrients that are needed for plant growth especially, you'll find that the farmlands are afforded artificial fertilizers and in some cases manure, especially where subsistence farming takes place, where the manure from the animals on that particular plot is used, it's not wasted, it is used to add the mineral content that the soil needs. And of course, there are other practices that are engaged, such as crop rotation, that will improve the quality of the soil. Then we speak to relief. Relief as a physical factor, it speaks to the height and the shape of the land. So we have farm plots on hilly areas or on the hilltops, such as the Cockpit Country or the Blue Mountains. We also have farmlands on plains. Now, the relief is very important, seeing that it determines the extent of the machines that are being used on the plots, how they are used, if they should be used, what plants are planted or what crops are planted, what animals are engaged in the farming activity as well. The higher in elevation, the cooler it is, as I mentioned before. And some crops, they prefer the cooler temperatures as opposed to warmer temperatures on the flat land. In Jamaica, for example, or based on our history, we'll find that commercial farming is predominantly done on plains or on flat lands. Subsistence farming or peasant farming is done on hillside. Examples of crops that are grown on plains would include sugarcane, and on hilly terrains we will have our yams and other grown provisions, especially those that are in country areas. You probably can give us a lesson in terms of 1 and 2 types of yam as they are. Bananas are also grown on flat terrain, especially in areas such as Portland, St. Mary, and St. James. We are now looking at the economic factors that will influence development. Before I make mention of these factors, let us quickly review the physical factors that were listed. We spoke about the soil being an important element for crop production. We spoke about the climate, which speaks to the temperature and rainfall in a particular area, the availability of water. Where there is lack, irrigation systems are put in place. We also spoke of the relief, which is the height and the shape of the land. Some crops grow best and on flat terrains, while others, they grow best in hilly terrains. The economic factors would include that of capital and market. And we look at market in 2 ways. The market can be the demand for the item or the farm produce, or the market can be the physical space where the farmer meets those to whom will consume or purchase the farm products. Distance from the farm must be considered as a farmer if you plan to set up a farm. Depending on the crop that you will produce, you want to know how far can I carry these tomatoes before they ripe or they get soft? How far do I need to carry my cabbage, or how far do I need to carry my lettuce without them being withered? And so that is very, very, very important to determine how is it that you're going to get access from your farmland to your market as well. So the perishable items, you wouldn't want to go very far off from your market. You need to be close enough to your market so that at the point of delivery, your goods, your produce are very much fresh. As opposed to yam, you know that you can have them probably a day before you take them to the market without the yam being stale, as Jamaicans will say. Capital speaks to money. And everybody love that sound, the whole money. Where farming is concerned, money is important because access to funds determines the availability or the lack thereof of certain things that are needed for farming to be effective. So we need money to buy the seeds, we need money to buy fertilizer, we need money to pay the rent for the land that we're going to use, depending on the land ownership that we're going to look at in a little while. We need money to rent machines, depending on the size of your farm. We need money to buy machete, hoe. So all the little things that are needed for your farm to produce the best quality goods must be considered. And some of the capital is afforded by the government by different schemes. We'll also check into that. Small-scale farmers, they usually suffer greatly due to the lack of capital. Sometimes they don't have enough money, and the little that they have is invested into the entire activity. So it's either they are buying with the money that they are earning in the local market, or they are buying supplies to replenish their farmlands. And it can be quite costly depending on the materials or resources that are needed for maximum protection and maximum yields on the different farms. The human factors would include land tenure, and where land tenure is concerned, it determines the size. Who owns the land? Is it a case that the farmer owns the land for himself, or is it that he's squatting? Because if he's squatting, he has a limited amount of space to work with. And that limited space cannot turn over much for him because he has to consider movement, one, and him can spread out on the people them land as if it is his. And that is a limitation for him as a farmer because he will not get access to the loans that he will need in order to develop the farming yields of his plot. So rights of the land is very important. Whether the farmer will lease, whether he owns, whether he's squatting, whether he's buying that portion of land is very important. If the land is owned by the farmer, then of course him can spread out and do whatever he wants. Him can decide, so I'm going to do lettuce here, so him can do the pig farm over there, so he can do the cattle over there. So whatever it is that he wants to do, he has the freedom to choose the activities that he will engage in. As opposed to squatters now, you live on somebody's piece of land, there's no way you can determine how you're going to spread out on it. You have a little space for yourself, you have to be comfortable. And as such, in order to generate the most of this farm, what squatters tend to do, they do in small portions, short-term crops or cash crops that will grow very fast to give them the turnover that they need or to provide for their immediate needs. I mentioned before that these squatters, it is very difficult for them to access the loans that they are going to need to maximize the needs of the farm or to maximize their yields on the farm simply because they don't have any rights to the land. Land fragmentation. So some of you, your parents and grandparents are from families that were dependent on farming activities. So when your great-grandfather died, or when your grandfather died, he would have owned a portion of land, and at his passing, he subdivided his land into different portions for his children. So your uncle got a portion, your aunt got a portion, possibly a cousin would got a portion. So the land is fragmented or subdivided based on the allotment. With that being said, the land size now becomes smaller and the plots are scattered all over the place. So the person who owns the land may not be sharing or having the best relationship. So of course, bad blood will have you own this land without any relation to the other. And we know the whole dynamics of that. Peasant farmers, on these plots of land tend to practice mixed farming. And I'll give you a chance to guess what mixed farming is all about. We looked at arable farming and we look at pastoral farming. What do you think mixed farming is all about? Think about it and respond. And of course, yes, mixed farming mixed farming will include the rearing of animals and the cultivation of crops on the same plot of land at the same time. And this would allow the farmer to have a variety of crops at the same time in the form of crop rotation to eliminate pests and disease and also to maximize the potential of the plot that he has. It is a constant supply for nutrients that the soil will need. So earlier on, I did mention that the manure from the plot of land that is assigned to the farmer is used on the same plot of land as fertilizer, or probably a little mulching might take place as a means of retaining the resources. Mulching, by the way, when the dried leaves are used to cover a plot of land to keep in the nutrients that are there. And of course, it helps in terms of pest control, and it also is cost effective because it limits the expenditure of the farmer trying to get additional fertilizers from the farm store in order to tend to his farm. In that case where land fragmentation is involved due to inheritance practices, then traditional means of farming are used. So I did mention crop rotation, mulching. We will hear some farmers from time to time talk about planting a particular crop when it is full moon or when it is moonshine, as opposed to planting up another crop when it is half moon or a particular time of the year, so that the yields are maximized. They are more knowledgeable, so probably they can give us a lesson in terms of why you'd plant certain crops at a certain time in certain places. Another human factor that must be considered is that of labor. Labor, whether it is manual or with the assistance of machines. Labor is necessary especially for planting, land preparation, harvesting, and of course to care and tend for the animals. Growing up, or the community that I grew up in, it is a farming community. So a lot of the persons or a lot of the farmers and families, early morning before my friends would go to school, they'll need to tie out the goat or tie out the pig or whatever it is before they go to school. So the farm animals themselves need to be tended to. On modern farms or large-scale farms, machines are heavily used. As opposed to small-scale farm or peasant farms, you find that primitive tools such as the machetes or the hoe and the forks are still being used. They don't have the big trolley behind them to pull the yields at harvesting time, but they are used to dumping the farm crops into crocus bag and baskets in order to store them, to move them to the nearby market. Donkeys are also being used to carry the farm produce from the farm to the market, and sometimes from the farm to the point of storage in some cases. In modern day, we find that taxis are now being hired, or probably a relative of the farmer will have a one car that they can use, if it is reliable enough, to bring them to the market. We look at the role of the government, which is very critical for development in the Caribbean region. And there are different supporting agencies that will carry out the mission of the government or the objective of the government in order to maximize the profits from farming activities. Some of these include Rural Agricultural Development Agency, commonly known as RADA. There is CAFAN, which serves Caribbean farmers. It is a Caribbean farmers network. There's also CARDI for research purposes, Caribbean Agricultural Research and Development Institute. And of course, back home in Jamaica, we have the JAS, which is the Jamaica Agricultural Society. Together, these agencies, as well as the government, they provide the loans that are needed by the farmers, the subsidies that are needed, and other financial assistance where they may see necessary. The government, at some point, they may take away farmlands for commercial development or tourism-related activities, seeing that tourism is a booming economy. We did mention that last week. The government may also want to distribute or redistribute new lands which will be available for people to engage in farming activities. Such assistance by the government, what it does, it helps to secure the plot of land that are afforded to the farmers, and it also protects them from natural hazards and disasters such as hurricanes, flooding, windstorm, or probably just a freak accident, as opposed to crop diseases and plant disease that may happen at any point of the year. We'll quickly look at the characteristics of commercial and peasant farming based on the characteristics that were highlighted earlier. We look at the farm size. Farm size meaning that on commercial farms, our holdings are usually over 200 hectares, while on peasant farms it is less than 2 hectares. Whereas the machines or tools that are used on farms, on peasant farms, it is primitives or simple tools, such as your hoe, your machete, as those listed up earlier. On commercial farms, we have heavy machines, such as tractors that are hauling, systems for harvesting, cultivation, as well as land preparation. In terms of labor, I did mention 2 types of labor. Labor can be manual or depending on machines. You may also have hired labor. This is specific to commercial farming activity. When we look at peasant farming, the labor it involves the farmer and his family, and sometimes a cousin or a friend may want to join in as well. The crops on commercial farms, they are grown specifically for the export market, whereas for peasant farms, it is grown for the consumption of the family, sometimes for the local market if there is enough for sale. On commercial farming, monoculture is practiced, meaning there's only one type of crop that is cultivated. Peasant farming, mixed farming is done. Crops are processed in factories on estates, and the waste materials are eliminated. Whereas multi-cropping, meaning different types of crops are grown at the same time. The use of modern technology on commercial farming as opposed to peasant farming. The plots are too small and the lands are very infertile, so it will not accommodate the technological use. Most fertile lands, they have, or commercial farms, they have fertile lands where the depth is adequate for cultivation, as opposed to peasant farming where there is low fertility on the hillside. We'll now pause for a break where we'll look at farming in Jamaica in the video that comes up right now.
To provide jobs for persons, it lets me feel like, I'm really contributing to the economy of the country. It's just a good feeling. And to produce the quality products, to compete with the international market, and to produce goods that actually look much better than imported goods, it's a good feeling for me.
Agro Investment Corporation continues to scout for lands in Jamaica that are best suited for agricultural production through the National Land Agency and the Commission of Lands, and also with private enterprises. So wherever there is unused government lands or private lands, Agro Investment Corporation will profile these lands.
So by now, we should all be aware of the benefits of leasing lands from the government. But once you've leased the land, how do you maximize returns? Well, knowing the soil type is important. For instance, did you know that over in the Ebony Park Spring Plain Agro Park, the soil type impacts the kinds of crops that can be planted there?
Ebony Park Agro Park is about 1,100 acres, and likewise the Spring Plain, and that's roughly all the lands within there. There are areas of non-arable areas, but there are arable areas. Arable areas amount on the Ebony Park side to about 800 acres. There's a lot of different soil types, predominantly Bonegate, clay loam. Basically anything can grow here. Once it requires a pH of about 6.5 to about 7. There are pockets where the pH might fall to about 5.5, 5.8. So if there's a crop that needs to be having a lower pH, soil could be amended to facilitate that. But basically anything will grow.
So let's revisit our checklist. We've applied and submitted all the necessary documentations, including proof of our capacity to invest in the land. We've learned about soil types and pH balances in the soil. What's next after you've been approved?
They would assign you a plot number, or they'd give you a designated area to where you'd be assigned. I guess you'd view it to see maybe what you'd need to do. If it needs a bit of clearing, you might want to look at that, how you go about doing that. You'll be advised as to the best way to get that done. You might want to go to the NIC because our water is pressurized, and so the NIC supplies it. So a part of your contract would give you the ability to go to NIC with tenure of land, and then they would then come and put your meter on so that you get ready supply for water. We also offer tractor services to plow, harrow, farrow, and other activities that you might want, rotovate and so on for your lands. So you'll be able to do that. Once you do that, we could tell you of maybe different cycles, crop cycles, where you might want to plant, best time for certain crop. You might be able to go out of these seasons, but at least we'll be able to tell you that this crop does well in a particular season. The risk might be higher in another season, but so might be the returns. So you could get advice as to that. So local advice will be there ready for you.
Meet Henry Givens, a youth farmer who is a beneficiary of this initiative. He started out acquiring just 5 acres of land, and today he is up to 15. Givens plants various crops at different stages, including Scotch bonnet pepper, sweet potato, and Maruga red watermelons, as well as slicing and plummy tomatoes.
Leasing land from the government, it is actually beneficial, and at the point where I would actually want to lease more if available. I am not employed otherwise, so it allows me to take care of my 2 babies, and it allows me to eat and survive. So it is something very beneficial, I would say. Life here at Ebony Park, it's twofold. It's good sometimes, and sometimes it's challenging. One, persons around, some persons, they know what to do with their crops, for example, and they don't want to do it. So sometimes, we have a lot of pest and disease outbreak, and some persons just don't want to invest the funds or do what is right to actually, make the agro park much better and a much cleaner environment. And then, also, sometimes there's a major issue with the whole irrigation system. It costs a lot sometimes, because even if you look into the pepper field, sun scalding is a result of a lack of water supply sometimes. But it's a blessing There is not only negative because, once you have irrigation, then, without the irrigation, I couldn't do anything like this, none at all.
Farming can be an expensive venture, but it's also beneficial. As a youth farmer, the challenges may not even be financial.
Some older persons, because they're so, relatively young, they don't want to work with you because they said they don't want to work with a younger person. However, sometimes it's good to know that, so for some persons that really can't afford to go into the farming as deep, that you can provide them with not only a job, but you can also assist them with technical advice to improve their smaller production that they do as well. My advice to younger farmers or investors is that they should not be discouraged or swayed from agriculture. It is something that can be beneficial, and it is a good way to make a good foundation for themselves and their families. So it's something that they should look into and be strong about it. That's the only way we can build our country.
That's all the time we have for today. Cape Economics is next, and we'll be showing a special repeat of last week's lesson, giving you the opportunity to cement the theories involved in consumer demand. Have a good day.
Hi there, I'm Simon Preston from TVJ. Thank you very much for watching our YouTube channel. To see our latest videos and also to see live events, click here. To see our full videos on onespotmedia.com, click here. Thank you very much for watching.
It's here. Interactive classes for all ages on the School Time channel on onespotmedia.com. With a combination of live Zoom classes and recorded class time, Schools Not Out lessons, and numerous educational content, we've created a comprehensive 24-hour channel dedicated exclusively to educating our nation's youth. Early childhood through to primary, secondary, and tertiary, it's one stop on one spot for education 24 hours. Brought to you by the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information in association with Television Jamaica Limited.
Hi there, I'm Simon Preston from TVJ. Thank you very much for watching our YouTube channel. To see our latest videos and also to see live events, click here. To see our full videos on onespotmedia.com, click here. Thank you very much for watching.
It's here. Interactive classes for all ages on the School Time channel on onespotmedia.com. With a combination of live Zoom classes and recorded class time, Schools Not Out lessons, and numerous educational content, we've created a comprehensive 24-hour channel dedicated exclusively to educating our nation's youth. Early childhood through to primary, secondary, and tertiary, it's one stop on one spot for education 24 hours. Brought to you by the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information in association with Television Jamaica Limited.
Hi there, I'm Simon Preston from TVJ. Thank you very much for watching our YouTube channel. To see our latest videos and also to see live events, click here. To see our full videos on onespotmedia.com, click here. Thank you very much for watching.
consumer who experiences an increase in their income is likely to purchase less of the inferior good. So you used to get $500 for your lunch money. Then your parents say, hey, I'm going to give you $1,000 now. Now that you stop getting a little bit of money, you say, all right, I'm not going to buy this good anymore. Maybe when you used to get the little bit of money, the $500, you used to purchase bun and cheese. But now that you're getting enough money, you're getting $1,000 per day, you decide that, hey, bun and cheese is not going to cut it for me anymore. I need to order some, ackee and saltfish and fried dumpling and barbecue chicken and fried chicken and everything. Because you were only purchasing bun and cheese simply because you didn't have enough money. So for you, that's an inferior good. For someone else, that inferior good could be what you consider to be inferior, could be a normal good, because maybe that's what they'll switch to purchasing when they have more money. Then there's also the giffen good. Giffen good. Now, the giffen good is a special type of inferior good, where when the price increases, that's when people start to purchase more. Usually, a good example of a situation like that is, say, for instance, you have a famine in a region, and food is scarce and so prices are high, and people generally purchase, rice, potato, different goods. But they purchase those along with meat. What might be happening is that meat is something that they usually purchase. They normally purchase potatoes too, and I'm using the potatoes as the example of the giffen good. But the price of meat has gone up and the price of potato also goes up. But the price of meat goes up so much that you decide that instead of, preparing potatoes and meat for dinner or breakfast or whatever meal, you decide that you're just going to purchase more potatoes, because even though the price has increased, the price of the other good you usually purchase has increased so much that you can't afford it either. And so you purchase more potatoes when the price increases. So it's a special type of inferior good. So that was a lot. And let me just break you a little bit so that I can ask some questions. And I want to also tell you to run for your pens, your pencils, your calculators for the next half of the lesson. If you're just joining us, you can do that. All right, so question. Can you explain 2 factors which would cause the demand curve to shift? I think I mentioned about 6 factors. And also, as it relates to the demand curve, what is the difference between a change in demand and a change in quantity demanded? All right, so maybe you're answering. Now, if you mention 2 factors which would cause the demand curve to shift and there are non-price factors, if you never say price, you're right. So if you said something like income or advertising or change in taste and preferences, you are correct. Those factors would cause the demand curve to shift. Now, what is the difference between the change in demand and the change in quantity demanded? If you said that the change in demand refers to a shift of the demand curve, then you are also correct. And if you said that the change in quantity demanded means that there has been a change in price and a movement along the demand curve, then you're also correct. So well done. Now, our topic, just to remind you, is the theory of consumer demand. And we know that in economics, they try to make assumptions, they try to understand human behavior, and that's why they refer to economics as a social science. They want to know what causes people to make the decisions that they make. And so they make assumptions, they come up with theories that they use to study behavior and make decisions on a larger scale at the macroeconomic level. Now, one theory that is used in microeconomics is the marginal utility theory. It's also referred to as the cardinalist approach. Now, based on the cardinalist approach, they believe, because I don't believe this, but they believe it, they believe that consumers make their decisions about what to purchase based on the satisfaction that they gain from the good or service. Now, the interesting part of this is how they believe consumers measure the satisfaction, and they believe that consumers assign a numeric value to measure the satisfaction that they get from each good. right? So in making a decision about what good to purchase, the consumers are looking at, you know, which, if you're looking at two goods, say you're looking at pineapples and bananas, the consumer is not looking to see, okay, this is bigger than this, let me purchase the pineapples or the bananas. No, the theory says that consumers assign a number, a numeric value in terms of satisfaction to those goods to say, okay, the pineapple will give me, you know, 50 U-tails and the banana will give me 100 U-tails. Since the banana is more satisfying, let me purchase the banana. That's what the theory says. That's not me. Now, we want to look at some key terms before we get into the marginalist or cardinalist theory as it relates to utility. Now, one key term is a rational consumer. And a rational consumer is one who looks at the costs and benefits and disadvantages of consuming additional units of a good. That's what they say a rational consumer is. There is also the concept of total utility. And the utility there is making reference to satisfaction. So total utility looks at the total satisfaction that you get from consuming a good or a service. So the total utility will include all the different satisfactions you get per unit, sum them up, and that will be your total utility. Then there is marginal utility. And marginal is a term that you'll hear more and more as you go on throughout economics. So marginal always looks at what happens when there is a change in terms of one unit. The marginal utility now is the extra satisfaction you get from consuming one more unit of a good. That's marginal utility. And the utils is the imaginary measure of satisfaction. So the marginal utility is based on utils. So for instance, they might say you get 10 utils from consuming a good, and that 10 utils represents the level of satisfaction you would receive from consuming the good. There is the principle of diminishing marginal utility. And again, you'll hear diminishing this and diminishing that in economics more. So diminishing marginal utility now is a theory or a concept which basically says, as you continue to consume more units of a good, each successive unit you consume will give you less satisfaction than the previous unit. So the first time you try a banana in your life, you know, you decide you're gonna try a banana for the first time. It is amazing. Oh my gosh, you've never tasted anything like this. How come I never discovered this fruit before? It's everything for you. And you think to yourself, I want to eat bananas every day. It's so good. But the truth is, as you continue to eat more bananas, you get less and less satisfaction. The experience doesn't feel as great as it did the first time. That's what the theory or the concept of diminishing marginal utility explains. Now, we want to look at what a rational consumer might do. And the rational consumer is one who aims to maximize utility. So I want you to look at this statement and see if you can fill in the blanks. It says, when consumers make choices about the quantity of goods and services to consume, the assumed objective is to maximize total utility, get as much as you can get, right? The consumer faces a number of constraints, the most important of which are the consumer's dash and the dash of the goods and services they wish to consume. I wonder if you are able to fill in those blanks. So think about it. You want to have as much satisfaction as possible, right? And you get the satisfaction from purchasing goods or using services. What are your limitations when you think about, okay, I'm going to buy this today. What do you think about, right? One of the first things you might say is you look at the price. And then you might think, okay, how much money do I have? So the first blank line there, it says the most important of which are the consumer's income, that's the first space, and the price of the goods. So you are restricted in terms of how much you can do because you have a little bit of money, you can't just spend and, you know, infinite sum of money. You are constrained by your income.
Another term we want to look at is the consumer equilibrium. And this permits the consumer to get the most satisfaction possible from your income, right? We'll look a little bit more on that. So when we think of a consumer who is purchasing a single good, we say that the consumer, if they're only consuming one good, they are in equilibrium when MU, or marginal utility, derived from the last unit consumed is equal to the price paid by the consumer. So when the MU from the last unit of good you use is equal to the price, you're in equilibrium. Now, what if the consumer is consuming multiple goods? Because we know we don't just consume one good per day. And sometimes, even if you think about what you eat, you want to eat something, you want to have a beverage. Now, when we consider a multiple good framework, the consumer is in equilibrium when the marginal utility for the last dollar they spend on one good or the first good, the marginal utility, the ratio of marginal utility to price based on the last dollar spent on one good or the first good is also equal to the ratio of the marginal utility to price of the second good. So the marginal utility in this example of good X divided by good X should be equal to the marginal utility of good Y divided by the price of good Y. What does that mean? It simply means the consumer will consume both goods to a point where they are indifferent. They get the same level of satisfaction from both. Now we want to look at this table, which is showing you total utility and marginal utility. And we are saying that the goods that we're focusing on are snow mints. And in the table, it has 3 columns and several rows. That's about 2, 4, 6, 8. Or, yeah, it's 8 rows. So the first, we're looking at the number of snow mints. So it goes from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then the total utilities related to those different numbers I mentioned are 0, 7, 11, 13, 14, 14, and then 13. The marginal utility, the first space is blank because you get no utility if you consume nothing. And then it's 7, 4, 2, 1, 0, and -1. What we're seeing in this table is that as the consumer consumes more of the good, the total utility is increasing. And we notice that the marginal utility is decreasing. Now, the marginal utility decreases because of the law of diminishing marginal utility. As you consume more snow mints, you get less satisfaction from each successive unit. However, we notice that the total utility increases up to a point. The total utility will decrease when the marginal utility becomes negative. How does this work? How do you get negative satisfaction? If you're consuming a good and as you continue to consume more units of the good, you get less and less satisfaction. You can consume the good up to a point where you're sick of the good, you're disgusted, it's like, I don't even want this. So you reach a point where you're dissatisfied, and that's where the negative marginal utility comes in. So because the marginal utility decreases as you consume additional units, you'll notice that the total utility increases, yes, up to a point, and as it increases, it's increasing at a decreasing rate. At first, it moves from 7 to 11, then from 11 to 13. We notice the gap gets smaller and smaller each time until it starts to decrease when the marginal utility becomes negative. Now, if you should use the data that was just showed to you to plot your total utility curve and your marginal utility curve, this is what it would look like. You'll notice the total utility curve increases sharply initially. That's when the marginal utility is at its highest. And then the curve gets a little flat because marginal utility, the law of diminishing marginal utility sets in, and MU is decreasing. And then we notice the total utility curve dips, and that's what happens when MU becomes negative. Now, this is one of the conditions we mentioned earlier about the consumer maximizing utility. And there are 2 conditions for utility maximization. The first one, this one I mentioned earlier, it's also referred to the equimarginal principle. And it's where the marginal utility divided by the price of one good is equal to the marginal utility divided by the price of the other good. And I did say earlier that what it means is that the consumer, when making the decision between two goods to make a purchase, they're going to consume the good to a point in which they are indifferent. So initially, if you have two goods, the consumer is going to purchase the good. Their first purchase will be the good that gives them more satisfaction. Now, because there is a law of diminishing marginal utility, if you focus on purchasing one good, eventually you will get less and less satisfaction. When the satisfaction of that good that you prefer starts to decline, you'll notice that the other good, because you haven't purchased any units of it, it will have a higher level of marginal utility or satisfaction, and so you'll make the decision to start purchasing the other good. So eventually you get to a point where you're indifferent. It doesn't matter which good you're purchasing, because the satisfaction gained from both will eventually be equal. Now, if you think about it, what I just said, to prove that this condition is real, as I mentioned, if you are purchasing apples and bananas, you have the option to purchase two goods. Right? Initially, you start to purchase the apples because, okay, apples are more satisfying. You have a higher level of utils. Eventually, you get to a point where the utils for apples start to fall. And so you switch to purchasing bananas. And then when you switch to purchasing bananas, the marginal utility for that will start to fall also. And eventually, you get to a point where you are indifferent between the two. It doesn't matter which of the two you purchase. Now, there is another condition for utility maximization, and this is that the consumer must spend all of their income. This means that the price times quantity of one good plus the price times the quantity of the other good should be equal to I, or income. Now, if the consumer has money left over when they have purchased, a certain quantity of both goods, it means that the price times quantity of one good plus the price times quantity of the other good is less than income. And that means that the consumer is not being rational. They're not maximizing their satisfaction. And to maximize satisfaction, you must consume both goods until you're indifferent. That's one condition. And also, you must spend all of your income. If you have more money, how can you be fully satisfied? When you have more money, it's a signal, it's a suggestion. It means that you are able to purchase more goods and get more satisfaction. So these are the two conditions of utility maximization. Now, this is where you need your pen, your pencil, a calculator, a marker, a crayon, whatever you use to write, right? And also your critical thinking skills. We want to look at the example where a consumer is choosing between two goods and there are different levels of marginal utility. Now, in this table, there are quantities of the first good. We'll call the first good A. And we have 4 columns where we're looking at the quantities and marginal utilities for both goods. For good A, we have the first, second, third, and fourth units. That's in the first column. In the second column, we have the marginal utility of good A, which is 7, 5, 3, and 1. In the third column, we have the second good, which is good B, and we have the quantities being the first, second, third, and fourth. Now, we're going to take a quick break and come back. Please keep this in mind.
Hi there, I'm Simon Preston from TVJ. Thank you very much for watching our YouTube channel. To see our latest videos and also to see live events, click here. To see our full videos on onespotmedia.com, click here. Thank you very much for watching.
Wigs, hair extensions, hair and skincare products? Check. Name brand clothes and shoes? Check. Top of the line Nokia, HP, Samsung phones, tablets, laptops? Check. Cosmetics, jewelry, household appliances, and much more, all under one roof. That's the new Super 88, located at 16 St. James Street, Montego Bay. Call 876-8800.
Wait a minute. People with moderate to severe asthma may be at a higher risk of getting very sick from COVID-19. The virus can affect your respiratory tract, which is your nose, throat, and lungs. It can cause an asthma attack and possibly lead to pneumonia and acute respiratory disease. The world is still working hard to find specific treatment for or a vaccine to prevent COVID-19. But until then, the best way to prevent illness is to avoid being exposed to this virus.
You know what's me now about to go up on the road?
Your health, your responsibility.
All right, so welcome back. And we are looking at the theory of consumer demand. Now, I just showed you a table looking at the marginal utilities of two goods. And what I want you to look at is quickly how I will show you the pattern of spending for the consumer. Now, based on this question, it says that the consumer has the option of purchasing two goods. Each good costs $1 each. And you want to know the combinations that the consumer will choose based on the satisfaction. Now, looking at this table, the consumer's choice will be first to purchase the first unit of good B because it has greater utils than the first unit of good A. The consumer's budget is $5, by the way. So the consumer purchases good B, and then they're going to compare the first unit of good A and good B. The second largest utils is good A. So the consumer will purchase A, then B again, then both A and B simultaneously because the utils is the same for both goods. I want you for your assignment now to calculate the total utils based on those goods and also to see if the consumer was maximizing their income. I also want to mention that when you have a situation where the prices are different, you will look at the marginal utility per dollar of both goods. In this example, you're seeing two goods. The price of one good is $2 and the price of the other good is $4, and you have the marginal utility. Your first step will be to calculate the marginal utility per dollar and then make the comparison. Now, we've done quite a bit today and we want to recap very quickly, and I hope you were paying attention. So I have a few questions for you. And I will not give you the answers to all of the questions because I want you to find some on your own. So I'll be moving through some of the questions. The first question is which best expresses the law of diminishing marginal utility. And if you scan through the responses, I would say that which is the best one, right? Look at that. I'll give you an answer for one of them. The second question says the total utility of a product is calculated by, and the response there is the third one, and it is the summing of the marginal utilities for each successive units. And I gave away this answer already. This is another question for you to look at. Which situation is consistent with the law of diminishing marginal return? Have you figured it out as yet? I hope you're writing these down. So that's all we have time for today on the theory of consumer demand. It was my pleasure being here. So please take the opportunity to send questions to us on the various platforms. And I guarantee you 100% you will benefit even more from this lesson and also the other lessons. Now, for a repeat of all three sessions, make sure you tune in later today on JNN at 4 p.m. Or you can always subscribe to onespotmedia.com to catch up on all that you've missed. Make absolute certain that you join us again tomorrow for more CSEC and CAPE classes. Until then, stay safe.
Hi there, I'm Simon Preston from TVJ. Thank you very much for watching our YouTube channel. To see our latest videos and also to see live events, click here. To see our full videos on onespotmedia.com, click here. Thank you very much for watching.
But do I think of the boundary? I think it's foolishness. It left out the land, it left out water.
If it is a case